talk about briefly. One of the things Marie talked about, of course, is it's the 50th anniversary of the Omnibus Bill, which was what decriminalized some same-sex activity, along with abortion and contraception and a few other sort of rights. And that's certainly, although there are stories of people staying in jail even after this legislation happened, but it was a turning point. But I think when I interviewed you, Marie, you talked about how we didn't have any rights still. You know, we may not be thrown in jail and we're not criminals, but we could be thrown out of our house for, I know you have a housing issue. Obviously jobs were under threat, families could throw you out, of course they're still unfortunately doing that in some cases. So those kind of challenges needed to sort of happen. In 1971, which was 2 years after the Omnibus Bill, we had the first LGBT protest in Canada happening on Parliament Hill. There was a sister demonstration in Vancouver, and we call it We Demand, and it was the list of, I believe, 10 different civil rights that were being denied our community. And this was, and in fact, actually, much like a day today, it was piss pouring raining, and there were, I think, about 100 people. I think, Marie, you told me you were there, right? So, I mean, again, here's someone who's been there from the get-go. But from We Demand, what happened was a month or two later, what both you have talked about is Gays of Ottawa, and that was the first organization that sort of came out that was really starting to not only fight for rights, but just sort of, I think there was a lot of consciousness raising in the early years in terms of just, you know, for people who have been systematically oppressed by all factors of society to, you know, unpack all of that negativity and self-hatred that our community was feeling at the time. So they were doing something from absolutely nothing. They built it from the ground up. But I know, Marie, what I want to touch base with you on is LOON and sort of the history of the lesbian movement in Ottawa, and also how that sometimes conflicted with the concurrent lesbian feminist movement that was happening. So maybe you could touch a little bit on that for me.
So when I started Gays of Ottawa, I think there were 2 of us, women. Like, there was mostly gay men, and there weren't that many lesbians. And I think that, to be honest, gay men did not necessarily have the same kind of personal investment in looking at their sexism as they do perhaps today. So we had a lot of conflict, for sure. And so we ended up, few of us, and lesbians in the community were not interested in getting involved in Gays of Ottawa. So we started a group called LOON, Lesbians of Ottawa Now, that we did our own thing. We ran drop-ins, we ran dances, we had a national conference here. We did a lot of stuff in the years that we were around. But I think what Glenn's talking about is the Women's Centre, and I have a personal experience I'd like to share, because there was a Women's Centre then on Old Somerset. And I went to a meeting there when they were organizing International Women's Day March, and we're looking at what issues did we want to focus on for this particular march, because we're going to put together a flyer that we're going to hand out. And so I was, you know, well, we have to have custody rights for lesbian mothers, because at that point, lesbians were losing their children. Husbands who had loaded firearms in the home and a history of beating the wife and children were getting custody of the children. Lesbians were, just because you were lesbian, you'd lose your children. And also there was no human rights protection, as Glenn was talking about. So we got decriminalized in '69, but the Ontario Human Rights Code did not change till 1986. So you could be fired. People would just say, you're fired. You're a lesbian, you're fired. Or I'm not renting to you because you're a lesbian, and they absolutely got away with it because there was nothing we could do about it. So my second issue was include sexual orientation in the Human Rights Code. And the women, my so-called sister lesbian feminists at the Women's Centre said, well, we can't do that. That's too controversial, that will upset the straight women. And I said, fuck you. I left the Ottawa Women's Centre. I got very much more involved in Gays of Ottawa, and that march, there were more gay men in that women's march that year than there were women, because I made it my business to make sure that happened. I was so pissed off. And I think also there was a class issue that I think we need to talk about. I'm a working class woman and I'm a bar-dyke. And so I did not have that much in common with academic lesbians who came from Carleton and the University of Ottawa and were saying things like, oh, butch femme stuff doesn't really exist. That's just something the old lesbians did, and they were copying straight people. And I have always identified as a femme, and that pissed me off as well. So there were just so many issues around class and different background and fear. I mean, I think it was all fear-based for the lesbian feminists were terrified that the movement was going to come down if we were too out as lesbians. And I could not agree with that. I could not live authentically and work in a movement that didn't let me live authentically. So then I got back involved with Gays of Ottawa. But then, you know, there were problems there. And I remember one board of directors meeting when Judy Gerard and we used to run a gallery at the old Gays of Ottawa, and the guys had a show up that had a whole bunch of dicks. Good for them. But we were running a women's bar, which was paying the rent in those days for that office space. And we just took them down. We said, we'll put them back up afterwards, but we don't want that stuff up. It's a women's night. And we got accused of censorship by the rest of the guys on the board, and Judy Gerard just said, we're doing this. We explained it. We said, either you take it down and you get this. We don't care if you understand it. We're telling you this is offensive to us. You get it or we're walking right now. We're out of here. And they all backed down and put stuff in place that the board then had to always be, you know, half women, half men on the board of directors. So, you know, there were problems in the old days. I think it was, you know, that norming, storming, growing stuff that happens in organizations, and there was crap, but I think we all stuck to it. And one of the things I think is amazing about Ottawa as a city, and certainly Gays, Ottawa Senior Pride Network, is that there are women and men and non-binary and gender fluid people who are involved in just 50 plus. All you have to be, you know, we're a lot older than that, but you could only, Glenn's even involved now. And
I'll be 50 this year.
Anyway, so that it was a struggle time, but I think that we have endured, and we've been doing this stuff now for almost 50 years, and we're still doing it, and we're very happy to be here. So.
I just wanted to just talking about the decriminalization, it didn't make that much of an impact on me personally, I have to say, at the time. It was an act of singular heroism by Pierre Trudeau to do this. I don't think we really appreciated it at the time, but by a little quirk of history, it is connected with something that did impact on us hugely. And this was the amendment received royal assent on the 27th of June, 1969. Now, does that date mean anything to anyone here? What? That was the day of legalization. Something else happened, though. Stonewall. Precisely in New York City on the early morning hours of June 28th, just after our proclamation was signed, the Stonewall, this is a whole other story which we don't have time for, but the Stonewall queer bar was raided by the police in New York, and led by a very impressive drag queen, the people fought back for the first time. And that was the beginning of gay liberation. And within 2 years, there were probably 300 organizations formed in North America, one of which was Gays of Ottawa.